So computing and education have kind of gone hand in hand from the very beginning of the first computers being built by educational institutions, to later the popularity of otherwise relatively uncommon personal computers in the classroom. And while these days the hot educational trend is one-to-one Chromebooks, which of course I love and have no issues with, that trend is partially based on the web app trend. And that trend was based on the internet trend, which was of course based on the original computer trend. And not to say that these trends are entirely a bad thing either, but there have become some pretty big names in this space. And with great power comes, say it with me, great inshtification, which is terrible. The whole point of educational software is to make learning more engaging, and yet when I hear that there's a new piece of software on the block, I don't exactly jump for joy. I think, oh god, what has my district gotten sold now? But how did we get to this dumpster fire? And is there a way to fix any of it? Well, to answer that, let's rewind for a while, because essentially from the beginning of personal computers being available, people have been sticking them in classrooms. Even before microcomputers, some schools were able to get larger mainframes from the likes of DEC and IBM. But once proper small desktop computers were available, there was quite an explosion in classroom computing. And having that new hardware available sparked a whole new industry in educational software, with players like the Minnesota Educational Computing Consortium arriving on the scene and developing wildly popular edutainment titles like the iconic Oregon Trail series and its spin-offs. And this was only compounded in 1978, when Apple Computer won a contract with MEC, who also oversaw the hardware side of Minnesota public schools, to supply the state with 500 Apple IIs. This partnership with MEC's software and Apple's hardware went on to spread all over the country and even further. It was also a big part of what put Apple on the map in the first place as a company. For a lot of people of a certain generation, the first Apple product that they interacted with was probably in a classroom. And even once the Macintosh came out and the Apple II and its derivatives, especially the Apple IIe, remained very popular in schools, going up to the early 90s. And during this, MEC continued to develop games like the Word and Number Muncher series, which, while not quite as iconic as Oregon Trail, were immensely popular. What would spell the end of the Apple II in the classrooms and eventually MEC was the multimedia PC though. Whether this was earlier PCs or Apple's newer offerings, the larger and better amount of interactivity, versatility, and ease of use offered by the graphical user interface would prove attractive to schools. And this later gave way to better multimedia PC experiences. So along with pushing the Apple II away, the greater availability of multimedia also spelled the end for MEC. Because believing they needed more resources to support DOS and the Macintosh while not having enough funding from the state of Minnesota, they spun off as a standalone company in the early 90s. The now Minnesota Educational Computing Corporation raised some funds from venture capital and was eventually acquired by SoftKey, a CD-ROM distributor, in 1995, which was later renamed to The Learning Company. Yes, that Learning Company, and subsequently acquired by Mattel. Shortly after this acquisition in October of 1999, MEC was fully shut down, with parts of its IP being merged into Mattel Interactive. These weird mergers and acquisitions will only become a running theme and get worse as we enter the modern day. And we're almost there, but in the meantime, you may be asking, Ren, what's Apple been doing during this time? And what about MS-DOS or Windows? You've barely even said anything about those. And that's because while MEC was becoming a real company, Apple wasn't doing too great. But just a few years later, while MEC and TLC were being folded into Mattel, Apple's iMac was quickly becoming popular in schools. As for MS-DOS, it's not that there were no schools using DOS-based computers in the 90s, but they certainly weren't as popular as Apple at the time. This was partly due to those early agreements with MEC that Apple had made donation programs, ease of use, and especially existing software ecosystems. Also at the same time, there was kind of an explosion in new software companies. And knock knock, it's Blackboard Incorporated, previously Blackboard LLC and CourseInfo LLC. Yep, here we go. First merger of the day. I haven't even talked about PowerSchool, and there's already been another merger. But this merger was quite successful, and Blackboard went on to be one of the first and largest purveyors of educational software in the internet era. especially encompassing the online LMS realm, and they're still kind of around to this day, even if not as popular, in the form of Anthology, which is yet another merger clusterfuck. Just a year prior to Blackboard in 1997, PowerSchool Incorporated was formed, and it focused on an SIS, or Student Information System, meant to be able to check grades, fees, and things like that, or see comments from teachers, either in a school computer lab or at home. They were even so successful and grew rapidly that Apple actually owned them for a few years in the early 2000s. I've kind of focused on the late 90s here because that's when a lot of these large, very greedy, modern companies were founded, but that isn't to say that there aren't big players that are newer, like one of the largest being Instructure, the makers of the seemingly ever-popular Canvas LMS, which was released in 2011. So, while that kind of seems like a lot of backstory, I think it's useful to understand how technology has been in education since the beginning, and to question why it's gotten worse. But also, that this is not necessarily a new problem. But even not thinking about the past, I think that you'll see that most of this software have UI design decisions that were seemingly about as well thought out as taking a bath with a toaster.
But apparently, I'm just full of bad ideas, because here I am. The biggest thing that I see all the time in general, but especially in the edtech space, is a company having a lovely, boring, modern website, and then the product looking like something out of 2010. A prime example of this is with PowerSchool. They're one of the leading student information systems. To be clear, when I say leading, I don't mean in quality, I mean profit. They are raking in money from school districts all over the US, and they've been sold too many times for me to count because I'm lazy, even being owned by Apple in the early 2000s. And while their website looks corporately bland and functional, I'm always weary of software companies that make a highly visual product that needs to be usable by many people and yet won't show it to you. What are they afraid of? And once you actually get into the software, I would say the nicest word I can use for it is outdated. Welcome to 2009, bitch. There's also Canvas, currently one of the most popular LMSs on the market. It's made by the company Instructure, which was acquired by KKR, a private equity firm. So I don't necessarily have high hopes for their future in quality either. They both do a similar thing as PowerSchool with generic statements about student success and some stock photos with 10-year-old MacBook Pros. Canvas isn't quite as ugly on the inside, but it's certainly not pretty and doesn't always prioritize usability either. Perfectly toasted.
So I think that UI designers often get a bad rap. Sometimes it's warranted, sometimes it's not. But educational software is absolutely filled with the bad apples of UI UX designers. And I think that the absolute worst of that comes from PowerSchool, because oh god, what a mess. Once you collapse this bar, it's fine. There's still some nonsensical icons, but I don't understand why this is enabled by default. And it's also fun because sometimes it won't remember that you've collapsed it when you come back, and honestly, anything with login credentials should associate UI preferences with that account, or at the very least, make proper use of local storage. It's not that hard. And Canvas has its fair share of nonsense as well, my absolute favorite being the immersive reader. The idea here being to have a somewhat screen reader-like interface, which seems nice for accessibility whether you have visual or reading impairments. Screen readers are incredibly helpful, but the big issue here is that Immersive Reader is just a bit too immersive in that it actually inhibits the functionality of a page. Because once you enter the Immersive Reader, you can't interact with any of the page elements, meaning that if there's links to outside sources or even within Canvas, you have to exit the Immersive Reader, click on the link, and then enter Immersive Reader again. And someone decided that instead of reading out the hyperlink text with an alt-style description, it would read out the whole ass link and then its physical appearance. Instructure says that the immersive reader is meant to help with reading comprehension, and the tools for showing syllables and parts of speech are actually quite cool and useful, but the interface just simply isn't suited to the heavy page-based system that Canvas relies on. It also doesn't seem to work on quizzes, which is an area where I think this kind of accessibility tool would be extremely helpful. And it turns out the reason the Immersive Reader just doesn't make sense for Canvas is that it wasn't built for Canvas. Immersive Reader is in fact a Microsoft product built for Office apps, and it works great in Word. But Word is not an interactive program. Hyperlinks are always going to be external, and there isn't an expectation of other embedded items like Google Assignments widgets. Canvas is interactive though, and that is kind of the whole point. If you just needed to read a document, teachers would just give you the document, not go to the work of converting it into a page or assignment. And funnily enough, the Word version of Immersive Reader does not in fact read out the whole URL, but just the display hyperlink, and you are in fact able to click said links. So they actually made it worse. The issue here is that rather than making Canvas pages themselves more accessible by having better variable fonts or another kind of built-in screen reader, they just cobbled on a third-party solution meant for text documents on top of the existing interface. And it's literally cobbled on top of it because it doesn't actually alter the page at all. It just appears on top of the content like one big modal, meaning if the page is reloaded, it goes away. And everything is essentially there twice, with the original being covered up, meaning it totally fucks with doing a modifier plus F in your browser, which makes it really annoying to find something specific on a large page. Oh, and by the way, this button at the top of PowerSchool actually just very slowly opens up this useless sidebar, which is literally just an option already in the other sidebar. Who the fuck thought that we needed this? Hey, speaking of sidebars popping out though, the idea of a sidebar in interface design dates back to the very beginning of the graphical user interface itself with the Xerox system, and in many places, they're extremely useful. But it's all in the execution and context. In some places, a sidebar is simply not appropriate, and PowerSchool's execution is neither well thought out nor appropriate. The first glaring issue is that it's just simply too big. And this only gets worse on small screens like Chromebooks, which are of course my favorite devices. I was wrong and you were right. All hail the mighty Google Chromebook. But the other issue with PowerSchool's sidebar is the entries are just so redundant. Please tell me who thought we needed this many options? Grades and attendance, missing assignments, class assignments, grade history, historical grades, attendance history, teacher comments, forms, student reports, balance, my schedule, school information, account preferences, my school bucks, demographic info, school bulletin, attendance monitor, school messenger, and student accounts. Jesus Christ, what the fuck? All I'm gonna say is that the person who decided that there needed to be this many entries will be missing tonight if I can find them. Okay, so maybe that's just a little bit mean and hyperbolic, and granted that student accounts button is, I believe, added by my school, so I'm not sure if I can entirely blame PowerSchool for this, but still. Attendant should just be one category called attendance. Grades and teacher comments really shouldn't be separated, and we can also combine bulletin, school information, and school messenger, which I have some beef with on its own, but we'll talk about that in a moment here. The two remaining can stay separate. That nearly halves down all the stupid entries in this sidebar, and so they could all fit in a top navigation bar, which would be easier to get to, take up less screen space, and serve the exact same function. Another kind of funny thing about the PowerSchool sidebar is that while there used to be almost as many options with almost the same icons back in the early 2000s as they currently use, Apple PowerSchool did not in fact use a silly sidebar with a bunch of super redundant entries. So maybe they were onto something. Well, Canvas is generally better in the interface department, and in fact, Instructure has its own React UI design library, which at least helps with consistency. There's still a lot of, if I'm being nice, strange choices. And my goodness, does Canvas love sidebars? Which is really my gripe here. It's less that each one is individually super poorly designed, and more so that the sidebar on sidebar totality simply becomes overwhelming and clunky. Having sidebars on both sides of the screen with nested sidebars is really stupid. Who thought that this was a good idea? They're next on my list after the PowerSchool people. The only truly poorly designed sidebar here is the to-do panel, which shows up on the dashboard and inside individual courses. And that's simply because it likes to show assignments that have already been completed, and none that are in the future. Alternatively, it'll show things that aren't in the near future, but a bunch of stuff that's months out, if a teacher has planned their assignments ahead of time. The main sidebar is less convoluted, but it is still a redundant mess, especially with the courses, dashboard, and Canvas logo at the top. Courses is just a kind of needless popover that, while seems useful in navigating between pages when inside another class, doesn't end up having any less steps to get to things when you still have to open it and then click on a page, which isn't any less steps than just going back to your dashboard. And this Canvas logo at the top also just takes you back to the dashboard. Having two buttons next to each other which really do the exact same thing is really silly. I also fail to understand the point of this whole history section. Why would you need to know the exact order of pages that you've recently visited? I could see maybe there being some situation where you would need this for if a teacher is investigating cheating maybe, but even then, I don't see why it would have to show up on the student side. If I'm looking for something that I had recently visited, I'll probably just go back or look in my browsing history where I find all my other history.
Now, if we scroll down here just a little bit on Canvas, there's this Instructure watermark. The funny part to me here is this is the old Instructure logo, which they changed last summer. And when I say changed, I mean they got rid of their actual logo and put a period after their name. 10 out of 10, amazing rebrand, everyone clap for Instructure. But when it comes to PowerSchool, it's very messy. But since I alluded to School Messenger earlier, let's focus on that again. School Messenger is exactly what it sounds like. It conveys school messages, like mailing lists, notifications for parents, and will even help you design a hideous website for your whole district. And our favorite company, PowerSchool Holdings Incorporated, acquired them back in October of 2023. A fact that they're still putting front and center on schoolmessenger.com 2 years later for some reason. But if you take a look at this sidebar, you'll see this ChatGPT Sphincter-esque logo. If you look at the School Messenger website, they instead have this more modern, simplified, bland version of their ChatGPT Sphincter-esque logo, which reminds me of a life preserver. The thing that I find the funniest and most lazy about this whole thing is that School Messenger Corporation first started using this life preserver logo no later than April of 2023, at least 6 months before PowerSchool even acquired them. So this is definitely the most nitpicky, just Ren bitching segment of the video, and you may be wondering why I even bothered. Who cares about a little logo, right? And that's fair. But it's also exactly the point. I find these rather minor issues to be indicative of these companies not really caring about their product. If you can't give a shit about a basic little logo like this, that shows an overall structural problem of just not really caring about your product. And there's kind of two scenarios here. Either they're simply too lazy to update their branding in their software, which is of course not good because it demonstrates an apathetic attitude towards quality, or they could simply have made it too difficult to update, which really isn't any better. You've just screwed yourself over in the future. And if you're a multi-billion-dollar corporation and you can't future-proof your software to have a logo be updatable, that's not good. So really my point here is that something as insignificant as a logo change, at least seemingly, can mean so much more. I get it, companies have to make money and brand themselves, and especially in the education space, you have to appear like you're doing something good for the world. But if you're going to put up that facade, at least attempt to seem like you care on the bare minimum level. These days, and when I say that, I really mean for like the past 10 years, everyone has to have a mobile app. And this makes sense for things like LMSs and SISs, to easily be able to check a grade or when an assignment is due. But it's also pretty silly to have that be the only thing that those apps can do. Because when I let a new thing onto my personal phone that I paid for, but is being used for school, it really needs to be able to justify its existence. When it comes to PowerSchool, it is nice that the interface is a bit more up to date than the web version. But there's still some weirdness that just make things feel a little bit slapdash. Things like spacing with these cards on the homepage, while not actually being any better organized than that nonsensical list from the web version. These cards are also, by far, way too big, especially by default when it shows both semesters, including classes you haven't taken yet, meaning you have to scroll through quite a bit to find something. While you can turn this off, it has the same issue as the web version where it doesn't always remember that decision. I deeply don't understand the point of the class's grid screen because it just displays the same information as the dashboard again. But okay, fine. And this More panel just has the same useless school information as the desktop sidebar. I guess at least they were ashamed enough of this stupid idea to hide it away this time, but at this point just get rid of it. And it's rather unintuitive to have the edit button for a bottom menu at the top of the screen. Canvas does do a better job in some areas, like being able to reorder courses, switch to a list view instead of cards, and generally being a bit more customizable. But its issues are really more that it doesn't offer enough features to have it be worthwhile. Because essentially all that you can accomplish in the Canvas mobile app are checking grades and due dates, but there's no option to actually view assignments properly themselves. Pages are janky if they work at all, and quizzes seemingly aren't a thing. And I really don't understand the point here when basically every school that uses an LMS will also have an SIS system. Why bother with having a standalone app at all when it just doesn't offer that much information that's not contained also in your SIS? I'm also really not sure why they've separated students, parents, and teachers into completely separate mobile apps. But it also doesn't seem like Instructure is even entirely confident in this decision, given that they've decided to keep the GitHub repos platform-specific, but then each app type is just its own build target. And this is despite using React Native for all of this, with a stated eventual goal of truly native apps for each platform. But I'm really not sure why they'd want to do that. Because while in some situations having native looking and performing apps is nice, with Canvas, which is often being used by people who are tech illiterate and don't necessarily choose to use the software, thus requiring support and troubleshooting, different interfaces can be rather unhelpful. There very well be a good reason for this, the most obvious being performance, but given how slow and inconsistent Canvas Online is, I'm not sure they're insanely concerned with performance. But hey, speaking of slow and inconsistent,
this segment wasn't actually supposed to be here at all, but just before I sat down to finish this video, I had the most laughable experience with turnitin.com that I just had to include it here because it's honestly funny. They're one of the other companies from the late 90s that I talked about earlier. It was originally meant to detect plagiarism and more recently supposedly detecting writing from LLMs. This sounds like a fine idea. Plagiarism is bad and so is AI writing. Well, it would be great if it worked like at all. This is completely aside from the errors that are fraught with AI detection, but this is a paper which I submitted to turnitin.com a few days ago as of recording. It was marked as with 13% similarity. So exactly what did I plagiarize here? Well, right off the bat, it's flagged my own last name as being from a student paper. Whose student paper is it from? Well, probably mine, given that this is my school and the date that I submitted a paper through Turnitin on last year. It seems that I've plagiarized my own name. So I'm really sorry. I need to apologize publicly and probably be canceled given this egregious breach of trust. I'll also add that Turnitin knows my name. It should really be able to flag this as a separate thing and exclude it because it's my name. How am I plagiarizing that? But interestingly enough, it only flags my last name on the page headings and not in the other information heading, which is standard for MLA.
It also doesn't flag the header on the last page, presumably because it was too busy complaining about the words works cited, a literal quotation, and the word the. What the fuck is going on here? In the main body text, it will complain about the literal essay title as well as random conjunctions, which just so happened to be in the same order as some online articles. To be clear, they're not in a string next to each other, they are divided by other words. The simultaneously very funny and even more infuriating thing about Turnitin is that it's been this way for a long time, and I found this article from March of 2009 describing this exact issue. The researchers found high percentages of flagged material in the topic terms of papers, for example, global warming or topic phrases, which they defined as the paper topic, with a few words added, for example, the prevalence of childhood obesity continues to rise. So they got 16 years of warning for these and other issues and have done seemingly nothing? Great job. If you want to read the rest of this article, I've linked it in the description because I found it to be pretty interesting, and especially the responses from Turnitin's PR team at the time are really funny and the same kind of shit that they like to pull these days. But these days, Turnitin loves to advertise the AI writing detection portion of their originality suite. There's a banner ad at the very top of their website and the second homepage section, which is why it is really funny to have this footer. We use AI selectively to assist in creating marketing materials. AI-generated content is reviewed, edited, and fact-checked by humans to ensure it aligns with our standards of accuracy, quality, and brand integrity. Aside from the issues around reliability in detecting AI writing, which Turnitin has been found to do rather poorly at, I just cannot get past how funny it is to make your premier product AI detection and then admit to using AI to write your brand copy. It really doesn't get any better than that. Except it does. In any kind of situation where you have a bunch of people using a bunch of different software products and services together, whether that's an educational professional setting, there's an expectation, at least to an extent, of those products being able to be used together. That's where things like SSO services come in, making it easier to log into everything with one more secure identity rather than having idiots with sticky notes taped to their monitors. But in any situation where you want a bunch of services to interact and sync with each other, there all too often has to be something in the middle there to actually store and transmit that data. And that can become somewhat difficult in a space where everyone is trying to compete for multi-$100,000 contracts. No individual company has any interest in making their software interface with their competitors, especially if they have a whole suite of software that's meant to interact with each other. They're not going to then want that to interact with other suites. Like if you grade assignments in Canvas using built-in quizzes or SpeedGrader. No teacher wants to have to manually transfer over grades, so they're meant to sync together, but that sync is very unreliable. Funnily enough, on a day that I was recording some interviews that you'll see later with teachers, there was another teacher at the same time who was having an issue with PowerSchool where it just straight up refused to sync, and it provided completely unhelpful error codes. And just to have the privilege of this shitty unreliable syncing, you've got to pay up, because PowerSchool charges money for their API. A district spends hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on one platform to unite things together, all to pay to unite it together with other platforms. Oh, and those other platforms also cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. This person from Reddit apparently got quoted $30,000 for PowerSchool API access. And granted, I don't know how large of a school district that was. I asked them and they didn't respond. That's a fuck ton of money, especially for a simple API that most companies provide for free. And there's a lot of other things a school could use that for, like hiring a competent IT professional who doesn't expose the whole district's Aruba ClearPass policy manager to the public internet. What a funny idea. And with something like an SSO, the whole point of single sign-on is the single part. But when some things don't support it,
that really falls flat. For instance, most of the stuff in my and other districts is done through Google products, but Canvas doesn't actually support login with Google at all and only has login with Microsoft. So that means that the district has to maintain a whole Microsoft 365 subscription for each student just to log into Canvas, even though we don't use Microsoft products for other things at all. Technically, this doesn't cost anything. Microsoft 365 for education is free, but MS365 in a large setting is kind of a pain in the ass to manage, causing extra stress to already overstressed and understaffed IT departments. In my district's case, everything has to link to PowerSchool. That's where all profile information comes from, and then it's being fed into Google, Microsoft, and other accounts. So while you're removing that one complicated manual process, you're replacing it with maintaining a whole other service that's annoying and expensive. But the storage of all that information in something like PowerSchool leads to a bigger issue, far beyond annoying outdated interfaces, extra buttons, or silly workflows. Now at this point, we're getting into a territory where I'm not just annoyed, I am truly angry. And wouldn't you know it, it's because of PowerSchool. I just mentioned that essentially all of your information as a student is likely stored in PowerSchool, which is why it's very concerning that somewhere between December 19th and 28th, 2024, a massive data breach occurred, possibly exposing personal information of millions of students, including names, home addresses, emergency contact phone numbers, parental information, social security numbers, and worst of all, sensitive medical records. This breach also exposed teacher information related to their employment status and building assignments. And remember, all of these students are children whose parents had zero control over this, and absolutely no course of action. Because that's just another issue here. There's absolutely no choice here. If you're enrolled at a school that keeps records in PowerSchool, those records will be put in PowerSchool. And most districts do not have an option to opt out of this. So while data breaches are unfortunately all too common in today's world, if there's simply a service you use, you've got options. You can decide to not use that service in the first place. You can decide which information you share with that service. And if you're wronged by them, you can stop supporting them. And that's not to say that other companies having data breaches is okay, but with something like PowerSchool, with the amount of information that's there and who it belongs to, it's just really scary to not have any other options as a student or parent if you're worried about this kind of stuff. My information was likely exposed in the PowerSchool data breach, but I cannot go to my school and say, I don't want that information contained in PowerSchool from here on. That is not a choice that I have. And of course, it would be kind of unreasonable to ask for that anyway, or for the school to offer, because it adds much more complexity to what they're trying to do. The whole point of PowerSchool as a unifying system is to make it easier for information to be spread across areas of the school. But if you ask for that to not be a thing, that makes things harder for them. Okay, so for this one, let's just go rapid fire with some small but dumb problems. Why does Canvas have two different Google Drive integrations? One is old, hideous, and doesn't sort very well. One has 3 separate steps before you can even select a file to attach. Maybe there's a good reason for this, but I still think it looks dumb. A lot of these companies have a really strange, lazy marketing. If you ever want to have a time, just go on Facebook or Instagram of a large edtech vendor, and I guarantee you'll have a bit of a laugh. My favorite recently has been the one of PowerSchool, which is an interview from this district about why they rely on it so much. Kind of demonstrating my point earlier about over-reliance, but that aside, my goodness, is it poorly shot.
With the online platform, it was very easy. I was able to do my application, upload my resume and cover letter and letters of recommendation very easily. It's very important for there not to be a lot of friction, for it to be an easy process. If you're currently in a job, you don't have a lot of time.
This is just god-awful. And why is this Rode Wireless Pro transmitter just sticking out of their pocket like that? I've made dumb mistakes, probably in this video even, but I am a solo creator who makes no money doing this. PowerSchool was valued at $5.6 billion last year. They can hire a proper video crew to shoot an interview. And that is if this is a real interview at all and not just read off of a cue card. This interview also has way too loud of corporate generic stock music playing in the background.
There is no way you could take these products away from us. There's no way.
And they didn't pan the audio correctly to both the left and right channel.
I've used Power School products for many years. It's one of the things that I open up first thing in the morning and one of the things that I close out at the very end of the day.
In this one, it sounds like they've got in-camera audio on the right channels or just some mad noise.
In the online portal, there's a checklist, and if I missed something that was brought to my attention, or I get an email, Amanda was able to mark that, or I got an email automatically kicked to me so I could see if something was overlooked.
Either way, it's hideous. So if you're a multi-billion-dollar corporation who want to shoot your own interview, here's how you can do it.
Step 1. Face your subject away from the camera, even though that makes no sense for the interview and really only comes across as someone reading off of a cue card. Step 2. Don't white balance your camera or use one that shoots in a wide dynamic range. Step 3. You don't need a softbox or diffuse lights, just use the included reflector super close up. Those highlights aren't ugly or blown out, they're creative decisions. Step 4. Audio is silly. When you record higher quality audio with a lavalier, make sure to keep the built-in camera audio there as well. This will make sure you don't have to boost that volume in post, making your editing process lightning fast. Step 5. Make your music as loud and generic as possible. This will drown out the boring and meaningless things your interviewee is actually saying. Step 6. Transcode your video with the highest compression ratio possible. You wouldn't want to have people actually see who's being interviewed or anything. Follow my 6 simple steps and you too can achieve a Power School worthy interview. Biscuit Kitchen is my absolute favorite YouTube channel. They're the videos that I watch every day when I get up and the videos I watch every night before I go to bed. In fact, even though Ren almost never uploads videos, I still rely on them daily for my sense of well-being. There's just absolutely no way you could take them away from me. What kind of person would even do that? A monster, I say. A monster. I really hope I'm being paid a lot of money for this interview because, ostensibly, it's by someone who does have a lot of money. For reference, this is a scene which I think looks 10 times better. This is shot with the exact same lights, an Amaran 100X, and a random LED panel which I found at the thrift store for $5. It also uses the exact same camera. For some reason, if you click on the Assignments tab in this top section and the Assignments widget isn't enabled, it just says, no, it's disabled. If something isn't an option, then don't present the option in the first place. Maybe this should have been under mobile apps, but Power School's whole district code system is just so silly. Instead of just searching for a school district in the app itself, you have to type in a district code. And this isn't for security reasons, it's displayed on the login page for most school districts. Just make it a damn search box. It's really not that hard. Oh, look who's back, it's the sidebar. For some reason, when you hover over this useless forms section, the icon moves. This doesn't happen with any of the other sidebar entries, and it only happens when you hover over the text, so I'm guessing this is just some weird CSS. Either way, it's really dumb. As I mentioned earlier, both Power School and its structure were fully acquired by private equity firms about a year ago now. I am not a fan of this, because if you're unaware, private equity firms have a track record for taking out a huge loan to purchase a company and then slashing everything possible to make as much money as possible as quickly as possible. In return, they often take a management fee. The issue with this is that oftentimes in that rush for profit, the private equity firms do not care about quality or long-term sustainability even. If they can make enough money to pay off their loan and maybe profit some as well, they're happy, but that's as far as they're going to take it. So in those cuts, people lose their jobs, quality is compromised, and whatever. It's the cost of doing business. I just really don't think this is okay, especially when people rely on this, and this is literally educating everyone's future. Something I didn't even mention, other than when it comes to Turnitin, was how a lot of educational software vendors have turned to the AI buzzword to make their offerings more attractive, but also not really demonstrating a legitimate use for it. This is an issue in the space in general, but I think it's really inappropriate in this setting. It's front and center on so many of these vendors' websites, because if I got into that, this show would get even worse. So maybe we'll leave that for another day. I will say one thing though.
if an individual student cheats on an assignment and uses ChatGPT to write a paper or some other scenario, that one student is dishonest and their education is negatively impacted. That means they did not get that learning experience. Whereas, if a teacher uses a tool like Magic School, which the school pays for and thereby endorses, to make a lesson plan which includes inaccurate information, then a whole class or multiple classes are negatively impacted. Yes, this is somewhat on the teacher for not fact-checking things, but an AI system incentivizes that in the first place. And I honestly think it is utterly irresponsible to sell software like this entirely on the basis of vague AI features without a clear framework on how to make them useful or ethical.
So, the vast majority of educational software sucks for both students and teachers. It's expensive, it's difficult to maintain, and it's insecure. But why? Greed. Thanks, have a great night. But really, it's the same issue that faces so many other software fields, like how Adobe remains dominant among creatives even though the software is expensive and buggy. It's a chicken and egg situation. The software is expensive and bad because they have largely a monopoly. But now new companies can't break into the space because they can't compete against the big player. So that monopoly just stays, and it's very difficult to get rid of. And unfortunately, I fear that that extreme overload of features from many of these software companies is down to making their products look unique and sexy to admins for the purpose of expensive multi-year contracts rather than an actual positive impact on students or teachers. I don't have a solution to capitalism, but I can fix interface design. And to do that, I was curious about what some teachers thought, because while I can sit in my bathtub and whine about stupid antiquated UI paradigms, in the end, teachers are the real victims of this, given that they truly have to use it all day, every day. So, I spoke to two leading educators, Miss Drib and Miss Drab. Everyday victims of PowerSchool and Canvas, they've been anonymized for their protection and because we thought it would be funny to make it seem like they were witnesses in a true crime documentary.
It's the interface, it's the having to click a million things to get to one place. It's having 3 or 4 ways to do the same thing. So then when you're trying to teach somebody else or learn from somebody else, they're teaching you differently than maybe is the most efficient way. And so it just gets really mundane really quick. And then you don't want to use it. I shouldn't need a software or a programming degree in order to use a platform. And while I, as the youngest member, one of the younger members of the school, have a pretty easy time figuring it out and being able to click buttons until what I want to happen happens.
Many of these applications take a very dated approach to UI design, and it's outdated for a reason. It's not just visually unappealing and me being upset that there's no rounded corners. It's actively less usable for everyone. And that can be a hard balance to figure out, making software feature-rich and still usable. But it's really essential, and frankly, that's your job as a purveyor of this software. And that's why it's really unfortunate that it just isn't a priority at many of these vendors, seemingly.
It has too many buttons and also not enough buttons at the same time. And I hit walls frequently, and then I have to yell at Miss to fix it. And it just adds a lot of steps to my day. I'm clicking buttons for them, or we're finding buttons to click, and there's just so many. To create an assignment on Canvas, there's 4 or 5 clicks. That on Google Classroom would only have 2, but Google Classroom also doesn't offer all of the things that I need for an interface. So it becomes really taxing. There are just too many options within Canvas. I want to be able to easily assign a Google document so that I can provide immediate feedback without having to click 5 to 78 buttons. There's no good LMS. I think PowerSchool's the same way though, where it's one, it's not clearly marked, it's not clearly labeled, and then you have to click things, and there's a couple of different ways to get to different places, and you can also see things sometimes and not other times, and it just gets really annoying.
Ironically, it seems that the LMS people like the most is not made by an educational software company. It's Google's Classroom LMS.
So the first one I ever used was Google Classroom. It was great. I loved it. I still love it. Google Classroom, it spoke so nicely. They were friends. When I was a high schooler, we used Google Classroom. That was probably my first educational platform that we used.
And while I'm certainly not always a fan of Google software, I do agree that Classroom has the best balance of simplicity to feature ratio, and generally just gets the job done without the need for a bunch of extra stuff. So let's take a look at some examples of why this is the case with my new hit course, Intro to Gatekeeping. For one thing, it integrates beautifully with other Google Workspace products. If you get assigned a document, it can be turned in directly with this handy little turn in button at the top. I also really like the simplicity of navigation in Classroom. It just feels easier to get to things. And unlike Canvas, it doesn't feel like there's a million buttons that all go to the same place, and yet also not enough ways to get to things. And a small thing, but I really like that the website favicon changes depending on the class color theme. It's really useful if you're the kind of monster who leaves dozens of tabs open with multiple classrooms. So you can easily organize and find things without having to close them. Or it just makes it easier to organize in tab groups. I also like this sidebar a lot more. It just feels like it makes more sense. The cards are way better than the Canvas dashboard. Huh? Actually offering useful information like upcoming assignments and quick links to class sections? This is a dashboard. And it's really not that hard in structure. I also really like the calendar feature, which adds due dates for your assignments into your Google Calendar. It's very handy. And the direct link to a Google Drive folder for a given class is also really useful. It just keeps files from getting spread all over the place and makes assignments easy to find, especially if you're looking back at something older. Generally, it just feels much more intuitive and user-centric. Not to say that it's perfect. It has weak points, like the stream. It doesn't really make sense, it's not super helpful, and that's because it's all in chronological order. I just don't think it's that useful, and it kind of adds clutter to the interface when it's the default view in a class. Especially when this is an issue with the Canvas to-do list where things just appear in chronological order, and it means if you stockpile assignments a lot as a teacher, it kind of gets overwhelming for students. I think that this could be tweaked and be more useful, but in its current state, I don't love the stream. At least the instructor can disable the ability for students to post on the announcements feature, which is good because otherwise it's pretty easy to get posts like this, which I got in Intro to Gatekeeping. I don't love the People tab, mostly because it just doesn't seem that useful. I just can't think of a lot of circumstances where someone would need to know all the other people enrolled in their classes. It obviously makes sense from the teacher side, but I'm just not sure why it's there as a student. And whether you see this as a positive or negative, I generally see Classroom as being better for smaller supplemental activities or one-off assignments, but where you're still doing a lot of things on paper or full in-class activities, whereas Canvas is more suited to a fully digital classroom workflow. In that way, it makes sense that Classroom is generally more popular in the K-8 space, with Canvas really being meant to be a higher ed product. Still, overall, I think Classroom really excels in accessibility and ease of use. And to be clear, I'm not saying that every school should switch over or back to Google Classroom, because that only feeds into being entirely dependent on a single ecosystem. But more companies like PowerSchool, Instructure, and others should really be taking notes on Classroom's user-friendly interface rather than chasing endless, useless AI features to prop up their shoddy products. The real solution here is really a nice middle ground, prioritizing usability, ease of administration, and accessibility while still being a useful and feature-filled LMS or SIS. This especially seems important on the teacher side, where generally educators I asked were extremely annoyed by the complex process needed to accomplish almost anything and that's something that I wish I had been able to show more. And I even tried to spin up my own Canvas instance to demonstrate its interface from the course admin side, but I was not successful in that. So I apologize for all the censoring of especially the PowerSchool interface in this video. I obviously don't want to show a bunch of my own personal information, let alone teachers' full names. And sometimes it feels like PowerSchool school is just trying to put as much personally identifiable information on screen as humanly possible. So that was kind of a trick to work around here. With all that in mind, I'm curious to see what you lot think. There were a lot of interesting opinions on the video about Chromebooks from last year, and even if some people kind of missed the point, I still found it educational. So do leave a comment down below, and I'm excited to hear some thoughts on the subject. Otherwise, thank you so much if you made it to the end of this monstrosity. I've been working on this video for over 2 months now, so I really appreciate that you stuck around until the end. It's been a lot. If you know someone who might find this interesting, please do share it with them. It really helps the channel out, not only directly, but also as a signal to YouTube that it was good. Otherwise, maybe leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed for more. Diskette Kitchen is supported by the Stupid Bitches Foundation, dedicated to speaking on matters we were not asked about, and viewers more generous than you. Thanks for watching. If you've got a teacher in your life, maybe say something nice to them. They probably deserve it right now. And with that, cheerio, goodbye. I just cannot fathom this, but today is December 10th, meaning it has been 3 months. I just spent like 20 minutes splicing together a clip of In the Hall of the Mountain King, and now it is thoroughly stuck in my head. So I hope you bitches appreciate that, because this is gonna be an earworm for days.